Hello, this is Your Need to Know. I'm Elle Spada, your host. Thanks for joining us. Your Need to Know is a show to inform you about issues that are important for all of us. My guest today is Scott Barron. He is the Urban Conservation Specialist from Northern Virginia Soil and Water Conservation District. That in itself is a mouthful, but we'll talk about that in just a moment. Scott, you're here to tell us about an issue that is very important to our waterways, and in that regard it's important for all of us. It is the invasive species that we'll talk about, the water chestnut or the trappa. But first I'd like you to just define for us what is an invasive species.
Sure, thanks Ellie. An invasive species is one that was introduced to another location by people. Could be by accident, it could be on purpose. Both plants or animals can be invasive. And but it's not only non-native that makes it invasive, because there are many benign non-natives like our crops and things. But its aggressive nature causes or has the potential to cause environmental, economic harm, or harm to human health.
So that's the difference between like an invasive versus something you called benign. Or even there's a distinction between an animal or a plant that simply is given favorable conditions and there's simply too much of it, even if it's native. Are those distinct categories? For instance, everyone I think would be familiar with the deer population right now. It's it's not invasive though. There's another word for that. Can you describe that difference?
I'm not sure what the word is off the top of my head for animals. I know that for plants, native plants can be called, some of them can be called aggressive.
Okay.
Maybe something like trumpet creeper is a really attractive vine with these cool reddish orange flowers that hummingbirds love. It's a really nice plant. You might not want to put it in your yard because it's pretty aggressive. It's better for a more rural setting, a park or something. So it's native, and it's kind of aggressive, but it is native, it belongs here.
That
deer,
makes
I'm not
sense.
so sure about deer and Canada geese and things. I'm not sure what word to use.
No, we can stay with plants, because that makes a lot of sense to me. For instance, in my yard I planted these seeds, and I thought they were lovely until it's native, but it took over my whole little garden area, and then I looked on the packet and it said that it would be best planted in a meadow. I was like, that's not a meadow, that's my little raised garden.
Yes.
I wish I'd read the packet a little more carefully.
And
so
some
that
things,
is aggressive but not invasive.
yes.
Okay.
Or some things you might even want to plant in a pot, same thing, because of that aggressive nature.
All right, so back to invasive, because that's why you're here. Tell us about why you're here.
So at the Northern Virginia Soil and Water Conservation District, we have a program to control the aquatic species called two-horned trappa. Some people call them water chestnut, trappa, it's all the same thing. The scientific name is Trappa bispinosa, but two-horned trappa is native to Korea, China, Japan, and Taiwan. It's been present in Northern Virginia since at least 1995. It's aquatic, it's rooted but floating, and grows in fresh water that's calm or slowly moving.
Okay, so ponds, not streams?
A slow-moving stream or river, yes.
Okay.
In our area, fortunately, it's only been reported from lakes and ponds. I say fortunately because if it gets into the Potomac River or Chesapeake Bay, it could cause a lot of harm economically as well as environmentally and recreationally.
So it is a very aggressive, fast-growing plant. How is it harmful?
Well, trappa is harmful because the first year of an infestation, you're probably just going to see a few plants. And they look kind of cool. What is that? It's interesting. If you have, say, a small pond, within a year or two, it's going to become overwhelmed. It'll be almost completely covered. So what trappa does is, because it forms those dense mats all over the surface of the water, those mats reduce oxygen levels under the water, or I should say in the water, and also reduce sunlight levels. And aquatic plants and animals generally need lots of sunlight and oxygen, so therefore you're going to reduce biodiversity. It's also harmful because the seeds. Yeah, sure. So it's called two-horn trappa because these seeds, I don't know if you can see it, they have these horns or spines. These are the old seed pods, by the way. These are not the ones that would be growing right now.
Okay.
But they have little barbs on the spines, and it causes discomfort when you come into contact with them. It hurts.
I was going to say, those look terrible. They have it's like a triangle, but in 3D, and it has the little pointed edges.
Yes.
It looks like a little creature of some sort.
It does look like a little, we were saying
Like a
before,
Yoda.
yeah, a Yoda or a pig face or something like that. So, and that's how the plant spreads. It's got little barbs. You know, if you ever walk through tall grass or something, you get little burrs stuck to your clothes. It's kind of like that. This will stick to feathers, fur, equipment, your clothing.
Okay.
It's uncomfortable. Another thing about trappa is not only is it bad for the environment, but a dense a mat of trappa is hard to swim in or fish or boat. And if it gets into something like the Potomac River, you gotta spend a lot of time and money just to keep the water open for navigation.
Wow,
and there's a similar plant in the Northeast that's invasive, and they spend a lot of time with that.
So you have an example that you don't want to follow.
We do. The European water chestnut or European trappa, whatever, it occurs currently from Maryland up to Quebec.
Okay.
It used to occur here in the DC area, and amazing, so it was introduced here somehow around 1920, and by the late 1930s it formed big mats on the surface of the Potomac from DC down to Quantico. It's like 40 miles or so.
Sure.
The Army Corps of Engineers came in during World War II, and they rigged up some sort of contraption on boats to somehow rake or harvest this stuff.
Okay.
And amazingly, they got rid of all of it from the Potomac watershed in the following decades. Most of it up to 1945, and then some mop up in the coming decades, which was amazing. Like, to remove it from the watershed, that's really hard to do, but we don't want that to happen again. And so we're very fortunate that this plant has come it's come close to the Potomac River, but not actually been found there. So we're fortunate so far.
So let me have this in my mind. I've got an image of a pond, and perhaps there's lily pads. I moved here from Florida 2 years ago, so my ponds have alligators in Florida. But here, lily pads, what would normally be in the pond? And this, because we're going to show a video in just a few minutes, but what would normally be in a pond that's a healthy environment for a pond?
Yeah, it really depends on the pond. It depends on the situation, but right, you'd have native plants, maybe some cattails, water lilies. Some ponds have more vegetation than others, but a healthy pond would not have an invasive like Phragmites, which is the common reed, or trappa and things like that.
And when you see the trappa, it's really recognizable because it is a mat, and it has the distinct that it looks like a mat of grass or a mat of leaves.
Well, a large infestation is easy to see.
Okay.
I've been doing some trappa surveys this summer in public parks because we're trying to figure out where it is and where it isn't. Just a few plants is kind of hard to see. I use binoculars. So, for example, I found it in a park in the Springfield area, and there were like 60 plants, but it's not really obvious, especially if the trail isn't close to the water. But if it's a large infestation, it's pretty obvious. I can show it if you'd like. It's got this interesting rosette pattern.
Okay.
And let's see.
Long root system.
It's got a long root system. And I pulled this plant yesterday, and the flower isn't doing so well, but it had a small, pink, inconspicuous flower, which I think has fallen off. If you look closely, it's got these little air bladders that allow it to float.
Oh.
And the seeds are produced, the plants that come up in the spring, the first ones sprout at the end of April or so, but they keep on sprouting throughout the year. So if you want to pull it or use herbicide, you got to keep coming back.
Okay, so it's not an annual.
It is an annual because they will die off at the first hard frost. They just kind of disintegrate.
Okay.
And those seeds in the mud at the bottom of the pond, those will be next year's plants.
Oh, okay, that's
So
the problem.
what I was going to say is that the seeds, right now they'd be greenish, and they kind of hang down.
Okay.
Those first plants that sprout in April start to produce seeds now. But again, those plants are, the seeds are constantly coming up. So even in October, they're still coming up. So even if you were to say pull every last plant in July, you're still going to have more plants coming up throughout the year, most likely.
All right,
So it's a constant battle.
let's say that a person has a pond in their backyard or on a private property. Are they allowed to just go in and pull?
So
plant?
yes, although working out around water has some dangers, and I learned this from removing trappa by hand.
Okay.
Some ponds are very mucky.
Oh.
I've sunk up to my knees before,
Ew.
especially the ponds have a lot of sediment coming into them. So you got to be careful because yes, you can pull it, get as much of the root as possible, not just the rosette.
This is not for the faint of heart.
Yeah, it can be a little muddy. It's kind of fun, but it's a little messy.
It's a mucky thing.
Get as much of the root as possible. Pile it up on shore. If it's got the seeds, move it away from shore because we don't want a heavy rain to wash it back in.
Okay, got it.
And you just kind of spread it out on the shoreline and it'll dry up in the sun and die.
Oh, so you don't dispose of it. You don't
have to.
necessarily
You
throw
don't
it
have to.
away.
Yeah, and you can also put it in. You can make a little composter out of. You take some stakes, pound them into the mud. Get some, the orange silt fencing you may have seen on a construction site. Wrap that silt fencing all around it, top to bottom. Zip tie it securely, and you can dump it in there, and they'll kind of disintegrate and become this big black blob after a while.
Lovely.
So it's another way to do it if you want to save time, not going back and forth to the shoreline.
Right.
But be careful working in the water. It's don't do it alone.
No.
Have a buddy. Tell people where you're going to be. All that stuff. Yeah.
All right, well, we're going to take a small break and then we will be right back, and we have a video to show you of what the trappa looks like and more info.
Maria, so how's work?
It was fourth period biology. Our students just weren't getting how easily viruses spread. So Miss Bella and I had them role play a zombie virus outbreak. By the time they had all learned the lesson, all the living were dead. Hey, how's your job going?
That big sales meeting I planned? Next year. I might get to go.
Cool.
Let me tell you about the toughest guy on earth. He does the work of 2 jobs, but only gets paid for one. He's tough enough to feed the man that gave him a lifetime of nourishment. He has the crazy strength to lift the man that raised him up without even flinching. That's right. No employee of the month bonus check here. This guy, no, this warrior, will always be by his father's side, even if his dad will hardly remember. Good luck finding a gym to train for that. If this guy isn't the toughest guy on the planet, then I don't know who is. Caregiving is tougher than tough. Find the care guides you need at aarp.org/caregiving.
Hello there and welcome back to Your Need to Know. I'm Elle Spada, your host. My guest is Scott Barron. He is the Urban Conservation Specialist for Northern Virginia Soil and Water Conservation District. Scott, thank you for being here with us, and we have a video next so you can help us see what this invasive species looks like, this water trappa, Trappa bispinosa, and it is clearly potentially a huge problem because we discussed that what we cannot do is let it get into the Potomac or any other of the watersheds, because then we have a whole different dynamic going on with this invasive species, because it basically clogs the natural life and prevents the natural animals that would be there from thriving.
That's right.
So we should be able to show you, well, in this video, we're hoping you'll be able to talk to us about that.
Sure. So this is two-horned trappa and a nearby stormwater pond. You can see the small pink, kind of inconspicuous flower, and the species that occurs here, Trappa bispinosa or two-horned trappa, has red leaves to the undersides. The other trappa I mentioned, European water chestnut, that occurs from Maryland to Quebec, northeastern Maryland to Quebec, it has green undersides. So all trappa species have been declared invasive in the U.S., but for reporting purposes, if you can confirm that it's Trappa bispinosa or Trappa natans, European water chestnut, that is very helpful. But anyway, this is Trappa. You can see the rosette patterns on the surface of this stormwater pond. The water was rapidly receding. I was there a few days before, and it was a little higher. It was looking a little mucky here. So it's got that rosette patterns, about 12, 14 inches across, toothed triangular leaves, and upon close inspection, you might be able to see those little pink flowers this time of year.
So that particular video is of a pond that's located in Fairfax County, and so if someone were to go for a walk and see this plant in a pond, who can they tell? What's the best way for the community to contact someone who can help?
That's a good question. One of the things with invasive species is, in order to combat it, you need to know where it is and where it isn't. I think Virginia has something like 80,000 farm ponds. That's a lot of water to survey. So in Fairfax County alone, it's been reported from about 100 locations, about 150 total in our region. There are a few websites that are good to report. There's a few different ones where you can report it. One is on the USGS website, U.S. Geological Survey. It doesn't have a catchy name, but if you Google something like USGS non-indigenous aquatic, it should come up. That is the preferred one because our researchers use that one and they can see it in real time. Another website is called EddMaps, EDDMAPS, EddMaps. That is a really good site because you can not only report the presence of an invasive, but the absence. So on my surveys recently, I've not seen it in most of the ponds I've looked at, so I go to EddMaps to report it. Put in as much info as you can, the date, location, etc. And another site is iNaturalist. That's another one you can use.
Okay, so there are ways the community can get involved.
Yes.
And if you're in a responsible position to actually take it out, remove it yourself, you're fully able to do that. It just, we mentioned before that can be difficult. So what is the best case scenario that you see in your work with Soil and Water Conservation District for this eradication of this invasive species?
I'll answer this in a kind of a long way. The best scenario is to eradicate it, and because this species is still pretty local and kind of small in population, it's still possible that we can eradicate it. It's not too far. Once an invasive species goes, think of it as like a I don't know, I'm not sure what the word is, bell curve. Once it gets on that steep curve, after a while, you're not going to eradicate it. All you can do is just control it at best. But right now, because it's pretty local and small population, we think we can eradicate it. So we have funding for Fairfax County.
Okay, quick question. It is in one pond. It's in another pond, but not in this pond. How is it moving?
Oh, good question. So I touched on that before. It had those little seeds I showed you with those little barbs.
They're like sand spurs. They don't look like sand spurs, but they stick. They
stick to your clothes, feathers, fur, equipment, and anecdotally, it seems that Canada geese are the primary vectors in our area.
So they're carrying it, it's sticking on them,
And then they go to another.
fly from pond to pond.
Then they preen their feathers, and yeah, it's.
I guess
it's
they're I understand. I understand they're kind of difficult to work with, but is there any way to remove them from the geese, or they're not? That's probably
Yeah, it's probably
realistic.
not a good idea.
Okay, all right, we'll let that one go.
But another way they spread, I should say, is like I mentioned before, they grow in calm or slow-moving water.
Okay.
If there's a flood, the water is going to move faster. Those rosettes can detach from the roots, and if they have mature seeds, it can float to a new area and become established there.
All right, so now let's go back to, I didn't mean to interrupt, I just thought of
sorry.
that idea in the middle of this process. So you were saying at the moment it is in some ponds and not others,
Yes, we
and
think.
the best case scenario would be?
Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot the rest of the question. Yes, the best case scenario is is that we eradicate it in several years' time, 5-10 years. Our conservation district received a grant from Fairfax County. It is to be used on community property, which means HOAs, houses of worship, parks. We are using those funds primarily to treat it with herbicide. We're also using it for some outreach, and we're pulling it a little bit too, or we have been in the past. So the best case scenario is with that kind of funding and with additional funding from the state that's come in and that we hope to get more of from the state and federal government, that we can eradicate this plant.
And that's just pond by pond by pond, basically?
Pond by pond. And
Okay.
one of the things that we want to use the funding for, ideally, is to search for this plant. You can use satellite imagery. It gets technical, and I don't really know how it works, but you can use imagery to search for it, and there's some kind of spectral signature that hopefully Trappa bispinosa exhibits. I know Trappa natans does in the Northeast.
So the Northeast one does.
So they're looking at that right now, and then we could more easily find out where it is and where it isn't. You still need people to ground truth it, to go and check that out afterwards to make sure it really is there. But it's a lot easier to do it with computers way high above, looking at these thousands of water bodies, than it is, because we don't have an army of people to send to every pond and lake in
What
the
about
region.
drones?
That is a possibility. That would be that could be an effective way to look
Especially
for
for
it.
a large lake?
That's right. They're pretty maneuverable, and you can maybe use it in that way.
But it's still, you're talking years, because over winter it doesn't really go away. It just simply becomes dormant and then comes back.
Well, so in the late fall, the first hard frost kills it. It just kind of disintegrates.
All right.
Those seeds that were produced that summer, fall, those stay in the mud on the bottom of the pond or lake, and then they sprout from sometime in between next April and next October.
So what are the best months to pull it from the water?
The best month is as soon as you see it, so the spring.
Oh, okay.
If you do it now in July, you still can do it, but what happens is later in the year is when you have those mature seeds, you might knock them loose and they end up at the bottom of the pond. But it's better than not pulling it at all. And keep in mind, to be safe when working in the water, and those seeds can scratch. They're a little,
Official
they can hurt.
equipment on. You need like water mucking equipment on, boots and.
I mean, you can wade in with, it's up to you, you can wade in with sandals and shorts if you want to. Waders might be a little bit better.
Right. Alrighty, so let's see. What's the worst case scenario?
The worst case scenario is that through inaction, from not enough funding and such, that this plant is not controlled, and that it spreads into the Potomac River and Chesapeake Bay and causes a big mess like we've had with European water chestnut several decades ago.
So that's just to say thousands of dollars. So prevention with this funding is much better than ignoring it and then trying to compensate after.
That's right, millions. You spend a little bit now, a little bit of time and money now, or you're going to spend a lot of time and money later, and you're probably not going to be able to eradicate it later on. You've got to do it soon. And this species was just declared a Tier 2 noxious weed in Virginia.
Wow.
That means there are different levels, but Tier 2 means what I said before. It can still be eradicated because the population is small.
Oh, okay.
And hopefully with that designation, we can get more funding. So spend a little bit now or a lot more later.
So I did see there is a poster, and it will eventually, I guess, or is maybe now in some of the parks, and it says like be a habitat hero. And that poster describes a picture of what the trappa looks like. So if someone sees the trappa and sees that poster, they could then contact maybe even the Parks Department. There are a number of agencies who are aware of this, is that correct?
You could contact somebody at the different agencies, yes. And those flyers will hopefully double as signs. The way they were designed is an 8.5 by 11 inch piece of paper.
Okay.
And it's very basic. Here's what trappa is, here's why it's bad, how you can help.
Okay.
And we hope to get them produced as signs in the future, but it's also got some QR codes that teach you that show you how to help, including how to report it to that USGS site that I mentioned.
That's easier. Okay, good. Well, hopefully those signs will be able to, make their way into the parks and be very clear. That's good news, and that's probably from that funding.
Yes.
Just a short, tell us a little anecdote about how you, what benefit have you learned from just being in this particular job? Like, how has this job of eradicating invasive species helped you?
It's interesting in that it's a collaborative effort. We're not doing this by ourselves. Our main partners are the Department of Public Works and the Fairfax County Park Authority, but we have many, many other partners as well. HOAs, Houses of Worship, the USGS, I'm going to forget some, but there are many hardworking people out there working to control and hopefully eradicate this plant. And it's really cool to see everybody come together over a common goal that they're passionate about.
See, that's a message we needed to hear. I love the idea of collaborating. Thank you so much. This has been Your Need to Know. I'm Ellie. Thank you for joining us. For more information, you can find out about us on the web at the Fairfax County Public Access Station site. And you can watch previous episodes of Your Need to Know on YouTube.